Welcome back to another episode of the Savvy Founder podcast. Lately, I have been very interested in the beginning of success stories. And by the beginning, what I really mean is the time before they hit it. And the reason that I've been so interested in this is because I know that a lot of times people talk about success leaves clues. And the first thing that we typically dive into is, well, what was the strategy they used? And what was their system? How did they do their sales? How did they do their marketing? How did they do it? Can I do it the same way? Give me the steps. And I also love strategy. And I am a believer that all of the strategies work. It's just about finding the one that works for you. But I was looking to go a little bit deeper. And that's what we're going to go into today on the podcast. So there's this quote that I want to use to kick us off. And it is, all of our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them. And this is a quote by Walt Disney. And it's so fascinating because when I hear that quote, it takes me back to the very beginning of my entrepreneurial journey, where I was excited to really jump into business. I was filled with hope. And I wanted to look up what is the actual definition of hope. And the definition that came up was a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. And at the time, I remember thinking, I would love to have time freedom because I was already working in my engineering job. And so I was already quote unquote successful by most standards. I had a career and I was on a growth trajectory and I had a house and all the things that people use to check the box. But I think when you get to a point of having those things, you start to realize that there's other parts that you want. And this is where business came in for me because I really wanted to also have freedom. And I grew up seeing my dad build his own business and run his own business. And I saw the flexibility that he was able to have by having his own. And so instead of trying to find a reason at the time to delay, because let's be honest, I was really busy, I decided to lean into what is it that I need to do in order to get where I wanted to go. And so I hired my first business coach, not having any freaking idea what the heck I was going to do in business. This is a random fun fact, but I originally thought that I would be teaching people more about life balance and using things like yoga and breath work, which are things I still really love, and they helped me a lot. But that's not where I ended up. And so it's really fascinating because something that I think I've always held on to from the very beginning is this idea that my success is inevitable. The main thing is that I don't give up on what it is that I'm trying to accomplish and the rest will come. That's the thought that I've held on to, which has enabled me to think more long term when it comes to business versus allowing different things that can come up in the short term to deter me or to stop me or to throw me completely off. So let's dive in. Okay, so when it comes to having hope or really building your resilience in your business, I really think this comes down to a handful of things. And the first one is all about the way that you deal with uncertainty. Business, I think, is one of those areas where it really benefits you to have a regulated nervous system. And the reason I say this is because there tends to be a decent amount of uncertainty that exists. It's so different from, I know that every 2 weeks I'm going to get this paycheck. I just need to show up to work. I do the things and it's going to happen. In business, it's on you, right? And that's a benefit because you're able to directly drive your results. But if you're someone who is really used to that sustainable model, initially there's a lot of resistance that can come with that uncertainty that happens. And I say uncertainty initially with the income because that's what I remember in the very, very beginning phases. But even now, I experience uncertainty from time to time. Having a baby was a large moment of uncertainty because I had no idea what that would be like and how it would shift my business going forward. And because I didn't know, it was on me to choose how to navigate those different things that could come up, things that could be viewed as setbacks, and how to use them as a way to fuel me going forward, which for me, it worked out because I used it to change the way that I ran my business. I used it to say, okay, the way that I'm operating right now is actually not optimal for what's ahead of me because my time that I have to give to this is changing. The way that I want to deliver to my clients is changing. And the way that I want to show up is changing. And I still desire to make a massive impact. And so I use the uncertainty to actually fuel me making changes that I knew would help me more in the future versus really anchoring onto what I already knew and meeting the uncertainty with resistance. Something else that I think has been really helpful in navigating the different seasons that can come up in entrepreneurship is building resilience. And I think building resilience actually is multiple things. For one, mindset. Mindset is key because when you're dealing with something that initially you might view as a threat, oh, what is ahead of me is going to throw me off my game. I think it's easy to give in and to come up with all the reasons why it's not going to be possible. And it really takes having a different mindset, a different perspective, because that's really what our mindsets offer us, right? It gives us a different perspective. And depending on the perspective you currently have, it changes the way that you interact with your reality. Because I can look at one thing happening, for example, having a baby. Let's go back to that one. Whether you have kids or not, I think this is one that every single person can resonate with. If you have a kid, you can use that as, okay, because I have less time, I am not going to be able to make this work. Therefore, it's not meant for me. Or I can use that as, hey, this is actually an opportunity for me to figure out how to work better within my business, which is a view that I chose to take. And then I started to adjust accordingly. The same situation is happening in both. There's a baby who's taking more time, but the way that we view it impacts the way that we experience our reality. And that is something that is very important when you are really trying to build your resilience. Something else that I have found really helpful when it comes to dealing with uncertainty, and it applies to the resilience piece, is focusing on what you can control. There's so many different situations I could share with you where there were aspects that were completely out of my control. Something happened that I wasn't expecting. Something happened that literally was outside of my control. Let's use a launch, for example. In a launch, we plan a lot around, yes, where we want to go, how many people we want to welcome into our containers, how many people we want to serve. But really what we're planning is the actions that we're taking because that's what we can control. And there is an expectation or a hope or a goal that we set to have so many people come in. And in that, what I have found to be extremely helpful, especially when you're navigating something that could be challenging or that really stretches you, if you just zero back in that moment on what can I actually control right now, it will change the way that you show up because there is less giving of your power away to everything around you and more of realizing that you actually get to decide what is it that you want to do. Yes, this is happening around you. And now who are you going to be in this situation? And that will dictate what's going to happen next. It's so important that we do not allow ourselves to stay in the mode of being a victim within our business because from listening to all of these stories, no one ever got that way from doing that. I was listening to some, and I can't remember their name specifically, but some people hit what they would call rock bottom before they bounce up. And what they were doing when they were at the bottom is they were focusing on what can I control because everything around me is absolute chaos. How can I get my power back? And that's something that I still use to this day. How can I take my power back? What can I control right now? What do I want to do with the things that I can control? Another thing that's really helpful in this is seek support. Oh my goodness. There was definitely a phase before that I can think of a couple years ago where I felt really overwhelmed in my business. It was kind of like, what direction am I going? I knew that I was doing a pivot and it just was a season of no clarity. I wasn't sure where I was going. And in that time, I think, one of the biggest mistakes, which is that I did not seek support. I was not willing to speak up and say, hey, I actually really do need help right now. I need mentorship. I need to be around peers. I need to be around people who are figuring it out, who are driven, who are doing things that I want to be. Instead, I allowed myself to get secluded. And I think when we do that, it allows the uncertainty to feel bigger than what it is. Because when you have someone else's perspective on your situation, they're able to see it without all the emotion, without all the investment. And so sometimes they're able to get a clearer picture, and just knowing or hearing a different perspective around what we are experiencing is really helpful. Something else that I have found really helpful in leaning into courage and hope as we go forward, especially when you're dealing with something that is uncertain, is having a lot of flexibility. When I think about flexibility, I think about how am I willing to lean into change? How am I willing to get uncomfortable? Because it's really what flexibility is. It's almost the person who's the most willing to do something just a little bit outside of their comfort zone. They're the most flexible. When I studied abroad, I remember not being able to understand the language around me, and it was so freaking uncomfortable, but I was willing to adapt and to be flexible and to allow myself to just find the humor in what was going on. Sometimes it really is just that we take ourselves way too seriously, and it's actually not that big of a deal. Something that has helped me in the moment is when I'm able to sit back and really ask myself, like, a year from now, is this even something that I'm going to care about? A lot of times the answer is no. There's two things that I want to wrap up with. One is it's so important that you're able to maintain your own focus. And what I mean by that is, as I said in the very beginning of this episode, my view on business has always been what am I doing for the long term? When I invest in mentors, when I get in different containers, I'm thinking about the long game. I'm not necessarily thinking about a month from now, 3 months from now. I'm thinking that I am my best investment because the skills I learn, no one can take away from me. So in the long game, is this something that will benefit me or not? And that's very helpful, especially if there's any setback you're experiencing, because you're able to really start to see, oh, this is where I have an opportunity. This is where this is going to benefit me. One day I will share this with someone else, and they will be so empowered to know that, one, they're not alone, and someone else has navigated through this before. There's a quote, and I believe it was from a software company randomly, and it said, instead of freaking out about constraints, embrace them. Let them guide you. Constraints drive innovation and force focus. Instead of trying to remove them, use them to your advantage. And this is really what this entire episode is about, is when we are experiencing something that causes us to lean towards hope, to get closer to our dreams. Yes, there's courage. There's so much that's required for that. But when we really start to change our perspective, like I was saying, you're able to see, what can I change in this situation? And it will change what you're focusing on. I did the same thing as I was entering into motherhood, realizing that the way that I was running my business was not actually sustainable. And it caused me to be really innovative with how I wanted to model my business and to give myself permission to make those changes. It shifted what my focus was. My focus wasn't being on every single platform, doing more for the sake of doing more. It was doing the work that would be impactful to my clients, that helped them get a result that they needed, that helped other people be able to find me and to get to know my work. So with that, this episode I know is a little bit different. We're not talking about strategies here. We're really talking about your perspective in business and your mindset that can help you overcome different obstacles that come up in your business journey, because it's inevitable. Every single successful person, they have stories of how they struggled in the beginning. They have stories, and even not even just the beginning, throughout their journey. Oh my gosh, I went through this hiccup and then this amazing thing happened. And at any moment, they could have decided, this hiccup is bigger than I am. This is more than I can handle. I am not willing to practice, to lean into, to build the resilience that I need. There's not one success story I've heard where they said, I gave up when things got hard, and then they made it. They didn't make it when that happened. You don't even hear of those stories. And so whenever you're going through moments where you're feeling like you're being tested, I want you to remember that your success is on the other side of this. There might not be a date that you know right now of when. You may not know how. You probably Actually, I would say you do not know how, you do not know when, but you know that there is a pattern that happens with success, and hitting a hardship, hitting something that is viewed as a challenge, something that is an obstacle, is oftentimes the precursor to your own success, however you define that to be for you. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Savvy Founder podcast and for spending your time with me today. If you enjoyed this episode and you are looking forward to more episodes, please rate this podcast and tag me on Instagram stories. After you do, I would love to know what your biggest takeaway was. With that, I will see you next week right here on the Savvy Founder podcast. Stay savvy.